Hello. In the mid-1970s, Ronald Reagan came up with a strategy on how to deal with the Russian threat. Yeah, the Americans have always had a Russian threat. Instead of trying to defeat the Russians militarily, America was just going to outspend them. He threw everything into the military and into aerospace. And as he'd predicted, the Soviet states just couldn't keep up. 10 or so years later, the Soviet Union was financially dead in the water. So dead that they didn't even have the resources to march in on East Germany when Erich Honecker, the last leader of the German Democratic Republic, started to lose control of his increasingly uncomradely comrade citizens. And that was when the wall came down, not only between East and West Berlin, but right across the Soviet Union. However, I have another angle on the demise of East European communism. I'm sure that economics was a major factor, but I don't believe that it was the only factor. I think one of the most important subsidiary elements in the decline and fall of the Soviet Empire was photocopying machines. Well, not really so much the machines themselves as the technology and the ethos that they represented. In the Western world, from about the mid-1970s, photocopiers were all over the place. With increasing frequency, they were starting to creep out of offices and into homes. And if you didn't have one at home, there was certainly a photocopy service for hire in a local shop. That was in the West, not so in the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was very worried about unacceptable publications, unacceptable thoughts, unacceptable information. For instance, books were strictly controlled and censored, and if people managed to get a copy of a banned book and thought it was worth passing round, they would brave the harsh punishment that was the fate of anyone convicted of thought crime and secretly type up the whole thing on their own typewriters. It wasn't only novels on the banned list, of course. There were other things to do with the reality of life in the Soviet Union, facts and figures of crime statistics, drug usage, prisoner numbers in camps, that sort of thing. However, typing novels and restricted statistical papers takes time, energy, and commitment. Xeroxing is a lot less trouble. It was for that reason that the Soviet Union strictly controlled who owned photocopiers and kept an eagle eye on how many copies were made of anything and what it was. They also spent a lot of time and effort trying to invent a photocopier that would work only on a certain type of paper. I don't think that one succeeded, but it did tie up quite a lot of administrative and research resources at the time. And while this knowledge bottleneck was crippling invention and research and even a rational discussion of serious social problems behind the Iron Curtain, the West zipped ahead. Not only because it was more economically flexible, but because more people had access to what was turning into a suddenly, crucially precious commodity of the 20th century: information. And it's become even more valuable in this century. Marx was wrong about capitalist robber barons hoovering up the resources of the planet and consolidating their opulent lifestyles at the expense of a starving and impoverished proletariat. The next big thing was not going to be a scramble for the finite amount of diamonds and rump steaks on the planet. The scramble is on for information. Russia lost ground because her scientists and engineers couldn't get quick enough access to the latest information about things like computing languages, integrated circuits, and exotic metals, alloys, and medical advances. It's not the first time this has happened. Whenever information has been restricted, a civilization has slowed down or gone into reverse. The Catholic Church tried to restrict information in the 16th century, with the result that by the end of the 17th century, Catholic countries had lost their scientific and artistic preeminence to the freer Protestant countries in Northern Europe, and they never regained it. This is a wound which persists to this day. In those days, it took 100 years for the pitfalls of sluggish information exchange to show up. In the 1980s, it took about 10 years. Now, a lack of edge shows up in months. And that's why I'm raising this warning. It may be tempting for the guys in charge to restrict the flow of information, either for ideological or commercial reasons, but from a social point of view, it's a disaster. Black Pigeon has just put up a video about Patreon shutting down Lauren Southern et al. And he hits the nail on the head when he says there is an information war going on. We have to get our heads round this. The big battles, I mean, the really big battles, are the information battles. And it's all the worse because we can't see it. We don't see the bodies coming back. We don't see the triumphant troops wiping the ticker tape off their hats as they march past the cheering crowds. The battle is being fought by solitary nerds in small rooms, but it's a battle nonetheless. And in order to win such a war, there must be no restriction on information anywhere. And that's why net neutrality is so important.